Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating action research study from the Centro Colombo Americano. It actually reveals why we genuinely struggle to learn new languages. You know, we often blame our memory, our age, or just our lack of free time. But what if the real roadblock is entirely invisible? Today, we're unpacking a breakthrough study by researcher Yamith José Fandiño Parra, looking at how directly addressing the emotional side of learning completely transforms the student experience. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the hidden learning barrier, then we'll unpack affective factors, explain socio-affective strategies, go inside the action research, and finally, wrap up with mastering the learning process.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the hidden learning barrier.
So, there's this paradox that has frustrated both adult learners and educators for decades. Think about the last time you tried to learn a new language. It's tough, right? Well, research points out a really fascinating contradiction. Many adult beginners drop out of language classes feeling like they just aren't good at it, despite having already demonstrated incredible ingenuity, stamina, and determination in their lives and careers. I mean, these are smart, highly capable people who suddenly just hit a brick wall. So why do we give up? The research suggests it actually has very little to do with our intelligence and literally everything to do with how we feel about our own capacities.
To get past this, we absolutely need specific tools to cut through those hidden, invisible emotional barriers that cause us to throw in the towel when we feel we just aren't good enough. Research shows that the way we feel about ourselves can either facilitate or completely impede our learning. So if we want to unlock our inherent potential, we simply can't neglect our inner emotional needs anymore. We need the right set of scissors, so to speak, to cut through all that anxiety and self-doubt.
Okay, let's move into Section 2, unpacking affective factors.
I found this part incredibly interesting. Emotions and feelings are so often ignored in favor of cognitive drills. Historically, they've been treated as the Cinderella of education, left behind to do the dirty work in the shadows while grammar and vocabulary get to go to the ball. But as the researchers argue, affect is what links what's important to us to the outside world of people, things, and happenings. Attention and language learning actually benefit a ton when we finally bring our emotions out of the shadows. Humanistic language teaching breaks this down into 4 major factors that influence our success. First up is beliefs, basically what we think about our own talents and the nature of learning itself. Second is attitudes, how we genuinely feel about the language or the culture we're engaging with. Third are anxiety levels, and finally, motivation, which is the ultimate fuel and desire driving our effort.
Now, what's really fascinating here is researcher Scoville's contrast between 2 very different types of anxiety. We usually think of anxiety as a purely bad thing, right? But there's actually facilitating anxiety. This is a state that keeps us alert and gives us a competitive edge. It helps us focus. But then, on the flip side, there is debilitating anxiety. This is that awful angst that causes us to flee the new task. It triggers a fear of negative evaluation, a fear of tests, and this frustrating inability to adequately express our mature thoughts. That's the anxiety that makes us want to quit.
Which brings us to Section 3, Socio-Affective Strategies Explained.
So how do we fight back against that debilitating anxiety? Researchers call the solution language learning strategies. And these aren't just handouts the teacher gives you. They are the intentional, self-directed habits and behaviors that you personally use to truly internalize and retain new information. When comparing the major academic models for these strategies, a pretty key distinction emerges. The researcher Oxford explicitly separates direct mental processing from indirect emotional management. So O'Malley and Chamit groups things into metacognitive, cognitive, and socioaffective. Meanwhile, Oxford breaks it down into direct strategies, like memory and cognitive processing, and indirect strategies, which manage the learning without directly involving the target language. That indirect category is exactly where affective and social strategies live, and it's where emotional control is really forged. So instead of just memorizing a vocabulary list, these socio-affective strategies help learners regulate their emotions. We are talking about literal, concrete actions you can take, actively lowering your anxiety, giving yourself encouragement, taking your own emotional temperature to see if you're too stressed out to study, asking clarification questions, and cooperating with your peers. Applying these practical tools helps learners avoid those negative downward spirals like severe nervousness and the dreaded fear of public speaking.
Let's dive into Section 4, inside the action research.
To see how this actually works in the real world, let's look at a specific intervention at the Centro Colombo American in Bogota. The researcher worked with a group of 17 working adults enrolled in an early morning basic English course. And I mean early. They were meeting from 6:10 to 7:50 a.m. before heading off to their full-time jobs.
The goal was to see if explicitly teaching these emotional strategies right alongside their regular 3-month language instruction would positively change their trajectory and their entire relationship with learning.
To pull this off effectively, the instructor used Cohen's structured 7-step approach to strategy training. It's a pretty brilliant way to bring high-level psychology directly into a normal classroom. The instructor started by determining the learner's needs, selecting the right strategies, preparing customized materials, and then actually conducting explicit strategy training. So the students weren't just learning English, they were explicitly learning how to learn and how to manage their own emotional roadblocks.
And the researcher didn't just casually eyeball if it was working. They meticulously tracked the students' emotional shifts using real-time teaching logs, questionnaires, and a massive 50-statement rating scale that tracked their shifting anxieties, attitudes, beliefs, and motivations throughout the whole course.
And finally, Section 5, Mastering the Learning Process. The results of the study were honestly incredible. They prove that when students are explicitly taught to pay attention to their feelings and social interactions, they become immensely more aware of their own learning process. By integrating these socio-affective language learning strategies, the students didn't just learn English verbs, they learned how to interact successfully, how to regulate their attitudes, and how to take complete ownership of their own educational journey. The whole takeaway is captured beautifully in this quote from the study's conclusions. Affective factors are important considerations that both teachers and students need to reflect on to gain a deeper understanding of the nature of language learning and ultimately to gain insight about themselves. It turns out that applying these strategies doesn't just help you learn a language, it helps you know yourself better. Reflecting on this gives you a profound understanding of your own internal psychology. So as you reflect on your own lifelong learning journey, whether you're studying a language, picking up a new professional skill, or just exploring a new hobby, I want to leave you with this question to explore. What invisible emotional barrier, what underlying belief or debilitating anxiety is secretly holding back your next big breakthrough? Remember, you already have the ingenuity. You just might need to adjust your socio-affective strategy to finally cut through the noise. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.